So you can tell when someone has stopped listening. There was one exercise I thought about doing, and I was like, this is too cruel. But it was to have half of you go out and come up with a story to tell the other half, but then tell the other half to stop listening about 15 seconds into it and see how pissed off the rest of you get when you're trying to tell your story. But that's mean. So I didn't do that. But you can tell when people stop listening, right? So chapter 4, in a much less engaging way than how you did when you told us your stories, tells us about listening. And it starts with this one, the difference between hearing and listening. Have you ever been told by a parent that you weren't listening to them? Maybe. Are you listening to me? Mm-hmm. But you might say it to a parent. I've had that. I've been shamed by my kids being asked that. In fact, my son and I had a conversation just the other day. I wasn't talking to him about chapter 4. I don't do that to my kids. But he said, do you ever say to someone, they'll say something to you and you say, what? And then you realize what they said and you answer it before they can answer. Do you guys do that? I do it all the time, and I'm like, what is this delayed response I'm doing? But it's like my mind has to catch up with my mouth. I don't know. But I heard it, and eventually I listened. And the difference is that hearing is the ability, someone saying something and you can hear the sound. It's the physical ability to hear the sound. But listening is attending, like really paying attention, receiving, interpreting, and responding to messages. And that is a process, the process of listening that we're going to talk about. Is listening a choice? Yeah, it's a choice, and it's an active choice, because it's hard, and I know especially, I'm sure you're engaged every second you're in this room with me, but I bet there's some lectures you go to, especially with the big lecture halls. I remember walking into some of those and having to tell myself, you have to pay attention, because I did. It was just so boring, depending on the topic. And I would have to, do you ever kind of check yourself, what did you just say? Because you can go for 10, 15, 30 minutes, maybe an hour, without having any idea what they actually said. You heard them, but you weren't listening.
Yeah, sometimes I notice that I get too focused on taking notes that I'm not actually listening very well.
That's a good point. How many of you listen better when you're taking notes? Yeah? How about, is it easier if you can just listen and take it in? Yeah. I find if I'm typing it, I can do that and not be all engaged. It's like, because it's like ear to fingers. But if I'm writing physically, I pay more attention. And everybody's got their way. But that's a good point. Okay, so there are 4 stages of listening. The first is sensing, and that's really like the hearing. It's there's words being spoken. I'm aware of this. That's you're sensing it. And I don't know about you, but with the masks, it's sometimes hard for me to sense who is the one talking to me. I'm like, who said that? I have no idea. I've depended on lip reading as much as I do, or facial expressions. So you sense it, somebody's speaking, then you interpret it. You're like, can I understand what this person's saying? That's like if you've ever heard someone speaking in a foreign language. You can sense it. You know they're speaking, but you can't make any sense of it. You can't interpret. You can't get meaning from it. Or if someone's speaking using words that you don't understand, it's hard to interpret it. So you hear words, you attach meaning to them, and then you evaluate them. You decide, is this worth my time? Does this apply to me? Is it important to me to listen to this? Does it have any? And in Bo's case, when his roommates just refused to do anything, they apparently say, no, this is of no worth to me. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. And in a lot of the cases of times when the truck driver just did whatever he wanted to do, when the teacher didn't pay any attention to Sadie and went on ahead with her plans, they weren't, that what you were saying was not important. And that is offensive. So when you're listening and you're hearing something and you've given it meaning and then you decide if it's useful to you or not, sometimes created in that is cognitive dissonance. And we'll talk a lot about cognitive dissonance when we talk about persuasion. But the bottom line is that we tend to agree with what's comfortable to us. And if information is introduced that is uncomfortable, it creates conflict mentally, intellectually. And that's cognitive dissonance. And if you hear something that you disagree with and it becomes uncomfortable, you've got some options. You can just ignore it, like some of your examples did, or you can adjust your thinking and change because of what's been said to you, or you can find out more. But listening leads to cognitive dissonance a lot of the times because it introduces to you something that is different from what you've known to be true. When I was, this is a few years ago in Com 115, I had a student give a persuasive speech. Well, maybe it was informative, but it was about sex trafficking in Springfield. And at the time, I don't know, my head was in the sand or I was just too busy watching Netflix to realize that there was this crisis going on in my hometown. I had no idea that there was this underground, like really horrible situation with sex trafficking. So I was listening to the speech and I was like, this can't be. But she had all the proof. And I went on to learn more about it because I was so horrified. But it created cognitive dissonance with me. This was not the town I knew. This wasn't my reality. And I've gone on to learn more about it so that I was persuaded by it. That listening can create that because you evaluate if something is of worth or not. Okay, the fourth stage is when you react or respond to what's been said to you. That's when you ignore or actually do something in response to what you're listening to. So sensing, interpreting, evaluating, and reacting or responding are the four stages of listening. So your textbook provides some insights into how to be a better listener. Some of them are cheesy, some of them, they're all true, but some of them might give you an aha moment or not. But there are 8 ways for fine-tuning your listening skills. The first is to get ready to listen. What do you think that means?
Take a minute to really clear your mind so that you're ready to receive information instead of focusing on something else.
Yeah. Do you ever, if somebody says, I need to talk to you, does that make you go, oh crap, what have I done? I tend to, and then my listening is heightened, especially if my dad were to say it, or someone in authority over me, we need to talk, oh dear God, But even getting ready, and so I'm really ready to listen then, and you get, scared. But also the walk to class, or, just a friend needs to talk to you, or you're in a situation where you're getting instructions, mentally preparing yourself to do that. And trying to clear everything else from your mind, at least for a moment. What are some personal barriers to listening that need to be minimized?
Your own biases. Like if you're listening to a speech that may be like political in a way, if you go in there like already having decided that you're not going to listen to what they say because like their beliefs don't align with yours,
Yeah.
then you're just not going to listen to them. Like whether or not you're there to try to listen, you're not going to.
Very good, because you've made up your mind. You know it all already.
Yeah.
Right? Or you know you're going to disagree, so why listen? Good. And also, remember that psychological noise we talked about? Just having life go on often intrudes with listening. The third is leave distractions behind. And you all are a generation, your whole life you've had the distraction of technology more so than any other, I would say. I mean, it's, in my lifetime, I've watched it evolve, but you all, I mean, have always known to have devices, yes? At what age were you introduced to, like, did you get to have a phone?
I think I was 10 to 12.
Yeah,
Seventh grade.
yeah. What about like, video games and stuff, like, since you were little?
I had an older brother, and so he played video games from the time he was like 5.
Yeah.
So as soon as I was born, like when I was old enough to hold a controller, I was
Uh-huh.
like playing the game, with the unplugged controller while he was playing. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I would say, and I know it's cliche, but the phone is the biggest distraction. I mean, I'm on it all the time. And if I'm away from it, I get nervous. Like, what have I missed? And part of it is, I have aging parents and I've got kids and I'm, when tragedy strikes, you're gonna be there for the call, but mostly it's just what is happening that I've missed in the world, that sort of thing. Are there any other distractions you can think of that really inhibit listening? Yeah,
With like plants and like other ideas, instructions.
sure, absolutely.
Like other thoughts, technically.
I think that's just as bad as the phone, really. I mean, because we're multifaceted people with lots going on. It's hard to focus on one thing. It is. What you talked about, Tim, was don't rush to judgment. Don't assume something so that you stop listening altogether. How do you think we are as a culture with listening to the ideas of others that aren't the same as ours? Not so hot. It's very contentious. And having like an open dialogue where you actually exchange ideas in a civil manner, I think is not happening very often.
Very rare.
Very rare, especially right now. Everything politically, and right now we're heading into, hotbed of election season. But even during the pandemic, the differences of opinion of how to deal with all this, and if masks should be worn, if it should be dictated, if everything. At first, we were all in it together, and then it became a point of contention, and people wouldn't listen. It was just, here's my stuff. And have you ever known people who, if they don't want to listen, they just talk louder, talk more, like that's going to fix it?
Yeah.
And all those things happen when we rush to judgment.
Even people who are like supposed to be in a position where they are supposed to remain neutral, like have a really bad tendency to do that. I feel like when I was in high school, like my junior and senior year, our school, like we're a really small school, but we tried some like ethics bowl competition thing, and I was on it. And even the judges that they would have selected for like, we had like 4 judges per competition or whatever. And even the judges who were there to like, their goal was to judge things on an ethical basis, not on like your own beliefs and like whether or not they agreed with you. But they had like a 10-minute period where they could ask us questions and you would respond. And like 90% of the time, these people were like, they weren't asking any questions about any of the information you provided or anything related to ethics at all. It was always like, oh, so I noticed you believe this way. Can you explain why you would? Because I personally.
Oh.
And so it was like, it was really tough. The only judges who could actually like stay neutral were the people who were like psychology majors, or they were majoring in ethics, or they were professors. But they had a lot of people who would just like completely, take it all into a personal.
It got personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good example. Okay, the 5th one is listen for content and second for delivery. And this one's hard, especially, I mean, if there's someone, maybe they have a speech impediment, they have mannerisms that are really annoying. I had a principal who was a great guy, but during faculty meetings, he was this tall former football player, and he would just pace. And I just couldn't watch him. I could listen, but I couldn't watch him because he never stopped moving. It drove me nuts. But you might have had a teacher who had a delivery that you found, difficult. My economics teacher in high school his name Mr. Clary, and he wore see-through, he was this old man, he wore see-through white dress shirts, you know those, and he was real hairy, and he had hair that came out of his ears, and he just stood and read to us, and he was horrible. I mean, he was a nice man, bless him. I think he's gone on to his great reward, but I couldn't look at him. I just had to listen for the content, so I could get my A and roll on. But his delivery was upsetting to me. Have you ever experienced that where it's like, but you had to get the information?
We had a science teacher and she mispronounced every single scientific word you can imagine. And it was like the biggest pet peeve of mine ever because like in our books it have how to pronounce it.
And she
she'd be
couldn't do
reading
it.
and just, it was never right.
No.
Anytime. And you could try to correct her and she'd be like, well, I think it's this one. And it's
That's
like,
great.
no,